This is Le Château, a cozy minimalistic medieval city builder where you can build the kingdoms of your dreams without any challenges or stress. After the first 7 days of development, the game looked like this. All the required features existed and it played exactly how I wanted it to. But it also just wasn't that fun. It didn't feel very satisfying, which in turn took a big chunk of that intended coziness away. So I spent the past 10 months fixing this. But how exactly do I make it more satisfying? Well, if your answer is polish, you'd be right. If it's not, then I'm sorry, but you've lost talking privileges. Polish basically means something like shiny and without flaws, depending on how you want to interpret it. In Le Château, the basic gameplay loop works and is, for as far as I know, without flaws, but I wouldn't necessarily call it shiny. Sure, I could just up the bloom and call it a day, but I don't think I want to. Instead, I think I want to approach a more abstract form of shiny. That being that when you're playing the game, you get this warm and cozy feeling inside. So the first thing I did was change the fonts. In a game where 3D models are pixelated, it'd be weird to have this super clean font. Something like Roboto or Open Sans looks pretty, and nothing can top Comic Sans of course, but it'll make much more sense to make the fonts and with that the rest of the UI pixelated as well. It definitely takes some getting used to, especially if you've gaslit yourself into thinking that this looked pretty, but I am actually very happy with how this new font looks. It just fits the style of the game way better. But with that out of the way, let's talk about tweening. You know, my favorite thing to talk about when talking about game polish. I've talked a bit about it before when talking about how I made my Suiga game roguelike Popmoji back in January, but tweening is possibly one of the best parts of making your game feel great. Subtle movements designed to make your game pop. Like with the placement of objects. On day 3 of the game's initial development, I was really happy to show you this little animation I added when placing objects. It's very nice, but it's definitely missing that oomph factor, you know? And that is where tween comes into play. In case you don't remember what tweening is exactly, here's a bunch of graphs of how you can, instead of doing a movement linearly, you can make it ease in certain ways. In Unity, for example, that could look like this. It's a slight ease to make it feel more responsive. The movement, whether that is actual position, rotation, or skill, has a slight curve to make it feel more responsive and juicy rather than the linear pop, which was pretty stiff. I use this method as well for switching between objects, rotating the world, and even making buttons feel less boring. UI matters too, everyone. I don't like working on it, but it matters. The only non-tweening movement I've done with the tiles and such is when you place an object on a tile and it moves down ever so slightly. For that I just use a simple animation, but it's another cool example of how subtle movements still add a lot to the experience. Look, I've added snow! It's so pretty! Just thought I should share that before going to the next bit. So in the last devlog I talked about how I really like the special animation when you finish the build, how it's super juicy, and how it kind of makes you want to build as fast as possible because you really want to see that animation. I was super happy with it, and I scrapped it. Don't get me wrong, I still think that it is really awesome, but it just wasn't quite right. It was slow if the world was too big, and I just knew I could do way better. Besides, why not add more of them and have the game randomly decide which one to play? Yep. Because I had been spending so much time making every bit of the game look nice with tweening, I thought to myself, why not do the same for these animations? Instead of going through every tile and calling an animation on every single one of them, I allowed for some more freedom this way. So I made this class that contains all the info on that specific animation. Like, should it do something with the position, rotation, or skill? What is the target value for that change? How long should it take? What sound effects should it play? And what kind of easing does the animation have? And with the way I set up this class, all the elements together allow me to make a bunch of different animations that all look unique and incredibly satisfying. The game is already taking shape and looking more and more like a polished, cozy experience rather than a stiff and boring one. I love polish. Need more polish. Now there are also characters as part of several objects like on the walls, and they actually move around to make the game feel a little more alive. I added this mill object which rotates, really nice. Please don't try to touch it, you'll hurt your fingers. I got waving flags, jumping frogs, a swan, flying birds, wind, and just a bunch of stuff to make everything feel way more alive. So even if the people on the walls look like they're moving a little weird, it still adds a lot to the feel of the game. Hey buddy, where are you going? Don't fall off the edge. Okay, well there goes Fred. Clearly a lot has changed since the game's first week in development nearly a year ago. And I am so proud of it. It is incredible how some changes, some little, some big, can make a huge difference in how a game looks, feels, and just plays overall. The game is way more cozy than it ever has been before. But polishing visuals isn't the only way to make your game feel cozier. In fact, there are several more ways to do so, but that is something that I'll be talking about in the next devlog. So subscribe to the channel and don't forget to wishlist Le Château on Steam right now. We crushed 10 wishlists! Let's go!